friends. Welcome one and all to another installment of Dirt Road Discussions, the podcast that takes you for a walk down the dirt road and that is all about agriculture all the time. I'm your host, Cam Hammond. Ott Clark is the co-host of Dirt Road Discussions. Ott, it's great to be with you. I know we've worked together for a while now, but I'm not sure I've ever asked, what are some of your pet peeves?
Pet peeves. That's a great question. I'm gonna go with road rage. Road rage. I don't understand it. We're all doing our best. I don't know why somebody needs to be mad when they're driving next to us. You?
Okay.
What's yours?
Well, that's a good question. So before we jump back into that, so you're not the one with the road rage. It's the other people with the road rage that just definitely is your pet peeve.
I'm the happy guy driving 80 miles an hour on the freeway and somebody will tailgate or whatever. And so I just have never understood why people need to get mad. We're all trying to get where we're going.
We're all trying our best, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm with you there. So pet peeves for me, I mean, you have, well, I was going to say slow drivers. That was my pet peeve.
Ooh.
Kids leaving the lights on things like that. But I got a random one for you.
Okay.
It's a pet peeve with Microsoft. All right. So when you open up a Word document, that default font that shows up,
Okay.
that is my absolute biggest pet peeve. It's called Calibri, and anytime I see that Calibri font, I just want to just throw the computer.
You got to change it.
I don't know what happened to Times New Roman, but let's just leave it at Times New Roman, 12 font or 12 size, and we'll be good to go.
It wasn't
With
hurting
me?
Anybody. I'm all for it. Let's do it.
Okay, good. I appreciate that. So
I'll talk to my people at Microsoft.
hey, there we go. Out here on Dirt Road Discussions, not many things bug us, but we have the opportunity to interview some great people with amazing stories, and we hope that after listening, our dirt roadies come away learning something new and maybe even inspired. So, however, today's episode focuses on something that's more of a nuisance and is causing a lot of problems for several states across the country. No, I'm not talking about in-laws or the federal government, but I am talking about an invasive species, and currently there's one particular species that is causing great concern for farmers and ranchers. So yes, today we are talking about quagga mussels, and you may have heard of that in the news recently. So Ott, have you ever heard of quagga mussels prior to the podcast today?
I have.
Okay.
And I don't know a whole lot about them. I'm excited to learn a little bit more. Sounds like a bad deal.
It definitely is, yeah, and that's why this topic is so important today. And we hope that you'll listen, and hopefully we'll learn together with our guests. So with that, I'd say, Ott, it's time to flex our muscles. So let's get into it. So we've probably heard about invasive species in passing, but maybe we haven't thought much of it. However, have you ever wondered about why people sound the alarm when an invasive species is discovered in a new area? So if your state has bodies of waters in it, you'll definitely want to listen in, as this episode will more than likely stick to you. And our guest today knows quite a bit about these invasive aquatic pests and can teach us more about what's going on. So with that, we're pleased to be joined by Bruce Johnson. So Bruce works as the Lieutenant for Field Operations for the Utah Department of Natural Resources Division of Wildlife and has quite a bit of expertise in this area. So Bruce, thanks for joining us here on Dirt Road Discussions, and how are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you for having me today.
Well, thank you for your time. And like I said, this is something that's very important and that is affecting certain states right now and could potentially affect all states. So, Bruce, we're excited to jump into it and learn more from you. So would you mind just starting off the podcast by telling us a little bit more about yourself and your background?
Sure. I've been with the Utah Division of Wildlife for about 25 years now. I started a career in our waterfowl section as manager of our marshes and then moved to law enforcement. I have a law enforcement background with my family, and so this has just been kind of a natural family operation to work in wildlife resources and protect the resource. So I've done AIS for the last 6 years and focused my efforts there. And it's been eye-opening and a challenge and enlightening to what the resource challenges are and what's developing in the world today.
Okay, Bruce. The topic today, quagga mussels. For somebody that's never heard the word before, can you tell them what a quagga mussel is, where they came from, and why they're a bad deal?
Quagga mussels are definitely bad. They're a bivalve. They originated over in the Ukraine, in the Baltic region. And in the early to mid 1980s, the big container ships, the cargo ships that were transporting from that part of the world through the Great Lakes, they transported these in their ballast tanks. So when they go through the locks and get into the Great Lakes, they'd expel the water out of those ballast tanks. And so that's how we came to have quagga mussels in the U.S. is from those large container ships, dumped them into the Great Lakes, and then from there it progressed down those waterways. And with sport fishing and all the watercraft and boaters at the time didn't realize what was happening in the threat. And so when they would move from water body to water body, they were spreading it. And it's not something that is easily visible. It's not something that you can see like on your vehicle when you drive your vehicle down the road. You know, if you've gone through tar or asphalt and you've picked it up on your vehicle, it's visible. Quagga mussels in that threat are not always visible. In that larval form, their juvenile form, they're microscopic. They look like little microscopic worms, and so that is their greatest vector, is in a little bit of water. And studies over the years have shown you can have potentially up to 5,000 villagers in a liter of water. So any watercraft carrying a liter of water can have potentially thousands of these juvenile forms of the invasive species. And so it just is easily spread without even knowing it.
So for our listeners, the veligers, those are the microscopic larvae of the quagga mussels. Is that right, Bruce?
Correct. What
Okay.
you see in the pictures that people are familiar with is that shell form. Looks like a little clam. It's got the wavy lines through it. That's why its cousin is called a zebra mussel. It's got stripes on it like a zebra. And so zebra and quagga mussels are close cousins, and they have that appearance. And even the adult forms may only be as big as like your fingernail on your pinky finger. They don't get really big, but they're extremely adaptable, extremely invasive. And when they get into a water body, they filter everything and ruin the ecosystem, and it can ruin an entire fisheries.
And that's what I've heard, is that the species, they just basically just go out and they outcompete all the other things in the ecosystem. So they just take over and just cause a lot of damage, not only to, like fish species, but plant life and everything else, right?
Correct. Yeah, the pictures that people may see are entire encrustment of a boat prop or rocks. That is the truth. That is what it can look like. You can have a completely covered piece of property or shoreline, and it can ruin it because you're no longer able to walk on that shoreline. Even in sandals, those sharp shells are going to be cutting up your feet. They can ruin that entire environment, not just for wildlife, but also for the recreational possibilities as well. They filter everything out. And so it's clear water, but there's no value to that water as far as an ecosystem.
I've seen pictures and the water does look crystal clear, but they've killed everything that could have been seen in there. They take out the microscopic animal life that's in there. So there's not even microscopic bugs in there to to help produce. They've just deleted anything and everything except for themselves, and they are very prolific at eating as well. I think they said that they could filter, gallons and gallons every day of water through, each one and pull out anything and everything that was in there.
Yep, that's very true. They do. They're extremely adaptable, and conditions they can survive. They came from the Baltic region, so they can survive cold water, warm water. They are very adaptable, and that's why the message for all the states has been clean, drain, and dry your watercraft. Make sure that when you leave that body of water you're pulling your drain plugs, you're draining all that raw water, you're purging your bilge pump and all your systems, you're wiping everything down, making sure it's cleaned off so you're not transporting not just the aquatic invasive species that we're talking about, quagga mussels, but you're reducing the threat of all the other invasive species that are associated in that water body or associated vegetation in that water body.
And it's a very simple thing to do as well. I mean, most guys that I know that own a boat will only use it, once a week, once a year maybe. And so pulling those plugs and letting it drain and dry is a pretty simple thing to do.
It is, and hopefully people have been getting that message and spreading that word. One of the new things over the last few years that we have recognized is the type of boats that have visited waters, the wakeboard boats, cabin cruisers that have those internal systems or ballast tanks. Pull the sea strainers as well on all those wakeboard boats. People love them. You can go out and have a lot of fun with them. But part of pulling the plugs and draining that water, removing those sea strainers. A lot of shells or other organisms can be captured in that sea strainer. And it's basically just a filter. Unscrew it, drop it, clean it, and leave it out for your next inspection going through. It saves everybody a lot of time and grief and hopefully protects those waters that they value so much.
Yeah, and it's not only just boats, Bruce, right? But basically, this stuff, it can just attach itself to anything. So we're talking, paddle boards, canoes, even like fish tackle, right? Is that true?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
Certainly the boats that will hold water or anything that will contain water and allow them to survive over time is a higher threat. But we have seen quagga mussels attached to kayaks, canoes, any of the smaller watercraft, paddle boards. I know people don't view the non-motorized craft as maybe a boat or in that same realm, but it really is a threat, and we have seen it, and we have found kayaks that have left our state and shown up 2 or 3 states apart, and they still have attached mussels.
Oh.
All right, Bruce. The reason this topic came up is because there were signs, and they found the larva stage here in Idaho, in the central Idaho area on the Snake River. Can you tell everybody a little bit about that, and maybe talk about what they found and why it's important?
That's part of the sampling process. All of the states, all of our agencies participate in standardized sampling of the waters. And because boaters obviously don't stick to their own water or to their own state, they're transporting back and forth, we all kind of communicate and cooperate with what we're going to do and how we want to do that. So in Utah, we were sampling. Lake Mead became infested in 2007, just across the border in Nevada. Then we became infested about 5 years later in 2012, 13. We were sampling at that time, monitoring. And so that's part of our, I guess you'd call it our early warning. We want to make sure we're sampling as much as we can to get ahead of it because they are so invasive. So you do plankton tows, you do substrate samplers, Plankton tows are when you pull a net through the water to capture whatever's in that water column. And substrate samplers are to detect for anything that is settled and attached, because the biology of quagga mussels and zebra mussels, they are their adult form, they're attached. They need to be within 18 inches of each other to reproduce. And so when they do that, the villagers float through the water system until they get to that spot and they settle out and they attach. And they can be as small as a grain of sand or smaller than a grain of sand when they first find whatever it is they're going to attach to. And they're really strong. That byssal thread that they attach with is basically their foot. They hold on to it. They grip that whatever that substrate is. And so that's where they grow and populate. And when they found the villagers, that's the kind of the rapid response that they talked about when they addressed the public, was they're now implementing the rapid response plan. All of the states have gone through and go through that potential worst case scenario, kind of like disaster response for earthquakes, that kind of thing. What do we do if we have X, Y, or Z happen at this location? Who are we going to contact? Who are our partners? What are we going to do, and how do we respond with all of our resources to continue sampling, find that next level potentially if there's adults, if they're reproducing adults, what life cycle, the stages, where are we at, how age classifications, that kind of stuff is all part of a rapid response. And so that's what, from my understanding, Idaho has been going through. They got that initial verification that isn't just we found one test, we got a positive on one test. They verify multiple times, and then they increase their testing, verifying multiple times for any more positive readings. And so that's the process they're going through now. Utah did the same thing. We've had suspect waters where we did similar sampling, found it, increased our sampling, and we increased our, I guess you'd call it, restrictions on those water bodies to continue the monitoring process.
So, Bruce, it sounds like that for when these types of instances happen, that states have prepared and they're ready to go, boots on the ground to try and figure out what to do next. So maybe just share more about what you did in Utah when you found out, and then how did you go about, excuse me, how did you go about treating the quagga mussels to eradicate them? What are some of the treatment options?
Okay. There's a concept that we've kind of come up with. Prevention is containment. Containment is prevention. That's kind of one of the monikers we've worked with at Lake Powell. And that was created with National Park Service, Glen Canyon Recreation Area. The staff there were in prevention mode because of the Lake Mead threat. Then when we found it, we went into a containment mode. So we wanted to make sure we weren't spreading it to any other water body. So it's a shift in protocols. It's a shift in thought process. You increase all your sampling. You increase it tremendously. And you also start documenting and monitoring what other water bodies are your next threat. Because by the time you find it in one water body, it may have already made an initial jump to the next water body. And so you increase your sampling, you monitor the traffic and where your boats are traveling next and where that next threat level is. And so at that point, we've had a couple other water bodies identified. We had Sand Hollow State Park and Deer Creek State Park that determined we found sampling was a suspect water. So if that increases our next 3 years, we intensively monitor that. We do water restrictions, either by boat access or the process that those boats are accessing the water. So they're going through an inspection process, a decontamination process in and out of that water body. So it's not just a potential inconvenience to boaters, but it is a tremendous impact on the agency and the staffing and what's required to monitor that and prevent that next infestation potentially.
With Idaho, they put in a chemical, maybe for lack of a better term. Did you guys do anything like that?
Depend upon the water body and the circumstances and the progression of the infestation. That may not be possible for us at Lake Powell. That's not a possibility because it's a river system. At the time, we had no knowledge or ability or technology to allow that. Plus, it's so large with the water volume going through. There was no amount of chemical in the world that we could have used to treat it.
You bet.
Other locations across the country have attempted treatment methods and they have been successful, but it's very small, localized, and the water flow, the water patterns made it possible. Now, luckily, Idaho with their quick response. Honestly, I commend Idaho for the quick response, the active plan that they have in place and implemented it so quickly is amazing. It's impressive. And I appreciate that as a nearby state and next door to know that they took it as seriously as they did and acted. The treatment that they have, we're all going to learn from that. We've been noticing the different treatments, like I told you, across the country. Every time an agency or location takes some kind of action, we are all on pins and needles. The community is talking constantly about what did you do today? How did you do it? What did you find? How successful is it? What are the results? And to this point, I am quite confident in what they're doing and what the results are going to be. I look forward to seeing the outcome. Nobody wants to have this happen and nobody wants to have that impact, but it really is important what they're doing and what we can learn from it as all the surrounding states.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you hit on something important, just the importance of working together with your state agencies, your federal agencies, and your partners to have a quick, rapid response to something like this. And I think so here in Idaho and similar to Utah, we have a lot of irrigation through center pivots and things like that. And so I think that was part of the reason for this quick response is the damage that these things can do on water infrastructure. Could you touch more on what these quagga mussels can do in that area and why and what are the outcomes that can happen as a result of them just attaching to everything?
Yeah, with that strong Bissell thread hold that they can create when they lock onto whatever that item may be, they can impact an entire area, every water system, not just it may affect, and we talked about it, filtering the water and maybe some of the fisheries are impacted, but they'll plug up all those water control structures, all the piping, all the canals that provide under the water supply. Right there in that area, you've got the hydroelectric facility.
Mm-hmm.
That provides power to, I don't know how many communities, how many square miles of the state. But now it doesn't just affect the wildlife or the anglers. You're now talking about your general population that will be severely impacted through water impact fees, power costs increasing because the power companies, the water companies are now trying to alleviate that threat. They're putting in filters. They're doing treatment processes themselves. At Lake Mead, I believe they told me it was a $2 million process every year that they go through at Lake Mead. And they have to take down one or two of their tubes every year. And it is out of commission for a year. because that's what it takes to totally clean, replace, and then put it back into rotation. And I know farmers, I mean, they're not wanting to try to replace all of their pivots, all of their water, their canals. And if you're looking at water lines that are $100,000, 3 or 4 years, do you want to replace that in that amount of time? That's a heavy cost to bear for everybody.
Golly. So we're talking just economic impact, both indirect and direct impact. We're talking millions upon millions of dollars that could be could come as a result of these quagga mussels and their becoming invasive and just spreading everywhere.
Yeah, they did a study 15 or so years ago, and they estimated the impact just in Utah at that time would be $25 million a year at that time. So I can't even imagine what a current estimate would be of what it would cost a state to battle an infestation.
Yeah. And the Snake River goes through, Idaho and then heads towards Washington and Oregon. And I'm sure that they're very interested in what Idaho's doing. Can you go into the Idaho plan? They found it on a Monday. How long did it take for them to implement their plan? And what was their plan?
If I remember right, it was like a 48-hour implementation of, hey, we found this, let's mobilize, let's get everybody updated. Then it was, here's our options. And it was within a week, they were on the ground with multiple partners, personnel, equipment, and then began their treatment. I'm drawing a blank, I apologize. But they've done the treatment, arrest, and a treatment that was just completed. And they're seeing successful results from their sampling and monitoring that it is working. Obviously, cautious optimism, not knowing exactly where everything is at, how far spread it really is. And then it's going to take a while to monitor over the next, and that's why most of the standard rapid response plans are like a 3-year suspect water to monitor. We don't know all the impacts to the treatment yet, but I can tell you this, working with Idaho personnel before this and having the relationship and that communication that we talked about, they're very prepared, very well organized, and their plan is a good plan. And I totally support it, and looking at that for some of my operations and what I look to do. And I'm going to watch them closely. You'll see a lot of what Idaho's doing implemented in Utah's future plans.
And
Awesome.
Just to continue to expand on that, the treatment is like a powder, a liquid of copper. Is that
I believe
what I'm
copper
understanding?
sulfate, and it is dripped into the system, I believe, through their water tanks at certain locations. They've identified, and this is where each location is so dynamic and knowing what's what and where. Because especially where you're in the agricultural area, you have a lot of water sources, a lot of areas that you've got to try and cover and know where water sources are, where they're coming in, and account for that when you're trying to implement this kind of a response where you're producing a chemical and introducing it into the system. They have done a lot of homework. I can tell you, after talking to them, there was no sleep for a lot of people for multiple weeks now. And they're very committed to making sure that they get that treatment correctly, accurately, and then those effects are exactly what they were planning for.
Well, we definitely appreciate people like you and people in Idaho that have really worked together to coordinate this and just tackle it, as quickly and as best they can. So I know that part of what we're doing here is we're just trying to spread the word and educate people about this issue. I would imagine, that Twin Falls, Idaho, Twin Falls area, part of Idaho, it's a very recreation oriented place. There's lots of people on the river, and a lot of those people are probably wondering, hey, why can't we go on the river? Why can't we do what we've normally done? So what would be your advice to those individuals that want to get out and recreate and maybe don't fully understand the importance of what's going on?
That's a very good point. I'm glad you brought that up. The response plan isn't necessarily just about treatment to that location and to that water, but it is that message and that education to the local public that lives there, that operates a certain way with that water. Then you've got the other aspect, the recreational aspect, that are local and not local, that are transient coming into your area to launch a boat, to go recreate because they had a vacation planned, and now that's potentially being impacted. The restrictions for boat access there, totally understand and agree with that and appreciate the situation. The boaters are going to have to understand we're doing what we can at the time to the best of our ability, knowledge, and planning for the future. It's not that we're trying to just make it easy for us, but the protection of that water body, sustained protection, long-term viability of that for years and for generations. And so all the boaters, the message, clean, drain, and dry. Plan ahead. Plan to find another location. If that's where you're at and you are allowed to boat, understand those restrictions and why, and work with the staff there. Plan for that extra time for an inspection, for a decontamination, because it is that resource that they're participating on or with that we're trying to protect for them to be able to do it in the future. And there's a lot of boaters that don't understand that it will impact their boating in the future. It's not just today it took me an extra 30 minutes to get an inspection and we were frustrated. It's a fact that if it becomes clogged with quagga mussels, if it's infested, that water body, now admittedly the Snake River is not going to stop flowing, but if it's a reservoir, a nearby impacted reservoir or water body, if it goes out of commission for a couple of years, then they don't have that resource at all. So it's important to keep that in mind, that it's going to change. It is a dynamic situation, and they need to be aware and keep looking at those websites and locations for updates to help themselves and to help the staff there that are trying to monitor, and then help the recreators to get where they're wanting to go.
I'd like to compliment everything that Idaho's doing, because I was on social media a few days ago and I saw a post about, look at all the dead fish in Idaho's waters, because this chemical does kill fish. It's very harsh chemical, but it has to be. It has to nuke these quagga mussels and make sure that they don't survive. And I was reading through the comments, and 98% of them were people saying, hey, this is a good thing what Idaho's doing right now. And I was blown away that there were so many educated people that the Fish and Game, all the programs or all the organizations that are working, they were all doing a good job at marketing and letting everybody know that what we're doing is terrible, but it's going to save the whole Snake River system is what it's actually going to do. And so that's a pretty big deal.
It is, and that is one thing I've noticed too, is the support that Department of Ag and Idaho Fish and Game have, is that support, because it's not just affecting Idaho, but there's an entire river system that's potentially at risk. And so Oregon, Washington, all of those fisheries are at risk. And I do totally support the group that's there. The AIS team in Idaho is top notch. Worked with them for years. they are very educated, very smart, and hardworking. They will do what is best for that resource and for everybody involved. I have no doubt about that.
Yeah, it's been fascinating as you've explained more about these creatures, and they sound just like stubborn little pests that will just stick around, and it's almost like you're fighting an invisible enemy with them being so small. So, one follow up question to that. So, you mentioned how the species will just clog up infrastructure. So, could you just tell us about how they reproduce really quickly? How much can one? How far can it spread?
It depends on the system. In a river system, everything will flow downstream from there. So its ability to progress upstream is pretty much only by humans and leapfrogging it up. Downstream, conditions can be difficult, certainly for those villagers in a fast moving water system. It's more difficult to settle and attach, and then to try and be within distance of others, adult reproducers, than to be able to reproduce within that 18 inches or so. So that part, it's hard to say, but we have noticed in the last couple of years, Utah, I can speak specifically to Utah, increasing threats coming from other states, that it has already been a problem. It's progressed. They're an infested state, not just a water body, but an infested state. And we're finding boats arriving on our ramps that have adult, live, reproducing mussels. And we're finding them ready to launch at the top of our water bodies. And other states have noticed that increase as well. I'm not as worried as the natural progression or natural advancement is slower. That's easier to monitor and control. But that boating aspect and transport by humans is the number one threat.
And then, just to follow up on that, once those adult mussels, hit the water, I think I read something that an adult mussel can produce 30,000 to a million villagers per year. So I mean,
yep.
These things make bunny rabbits look pretty tame. So we may need to edit that part out, but I'm just saying these things reproduce like crazy, and that's why it's important just to cut the head off of the snake before they get out of control. So
yes, and that's why we talk to people when we do our boat shows and our exhibits. We can show that encrusted prop, or we've got several PVC pipes that we carry around in Utah that we take to our public exhibits, and they look at that and we explain, well, that's going to be your sprinkler lines. That's your incoming water line for your irrigation system or to your home. And so now that's affected. You may be without water service for a week while they replace the pipes and supply lines to your neighborhood. And that bothers people like no other. But you show them a glass of water sitting on the table there, and they're like, oh, well, there's nothing there. That's okay, not a problem. Well, that's where these things start. And so that message, that education of the process, how it goes, where it comes from. Yeah, when it gets into a water system, the costs and the impact cannot be measured, even if we tried to put a monetary amount to it today.
Golly.
Okay, Bruce, on the Dirt Road Discussion podcast, we like to look down the road. What do you see as the future of quagga mussels in the West?
I see it as a continuing threat and a continued vigilance with the inspection stations, with the AIS programs in every state, and their partners. In Utah, we have multiple partners, the different water user groups, and that is going to have to be a continued message for the public. And Idaho is going to be in that boat where they're going to have the continued monitoring, increased monitoring, and we're in that same boat next door. We're going to be watching closely, and it's not going away. The public may become, I guess, apathetic over time, but that message has to continue and has to change and evolve and be relevant. Because if we don't, it's just going to progress and continue, and pretty soon every state and multiple water bodies will be impacted by this. And, Cam, as you said, they are very prolific. They're very hardy. And when a little critter that's that small can survive a week in bleach water, when you can submerge it in bleach water and that thing will survive, you've got a battle on your hands.
Holy cow. Oh man, that's crazy. I mentioned in-laws earlier, and that reminds me of it. I'm just kidding. Sorry, Bruce. Bruce, so a lot of our listeners are farmers and ranchers, those in the ag community. What are some of the things that those in ag or farmers and ranchers, what can they do to help out with this? What do they need to know? How can they impact the situation for good?
Watch their systems, especially in that localized area. Be aware that that threat is now in their area. And when they go out to change water, look at those head gates. See if anything is attaching. Is there a threat further interior that wasn't aware before? Being aware of the needs, and it sounds, I guess, maybe self-serving, but be aware of the needs of the agencies and the partners in that area. Work with them to solve this problem. Work with them to get more legislative and money appropriations to help fight this. Put resources on the ground that'll help. That is very important to us, and that's how we survive in a lot of our areas here in Utah, is that support legislatively and with those user groups, and being connected with those communities when they call and say, hey, we found something in the irrigation canal. We're not sure. Can you come take a look? That helps us and does more to help protect the resource than a lot of other options out there.
That's perfect. I think you hit the nail on the head there, and that was a great point to bring up. Just legislatively, to our listeners, reach out to your legislators, let them know that this is important and that they need to be aware of this, because like you said, long-term thinking, right? We want to have these waterways and these systems for generations to come, and that can only happen through our coordinated efforts. So with that, we've been joined by Bruce Johnson. Bruce works as the Lieutenant for Field Operations for the Utah Department of Natural Resources Division of Wildlife. And Bruce, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for your knowledge, your expertise in this area, and sharing that with our listeners, and for all that you do for our farmers and ranchers. And we've really enjoyed our time with you today.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
And with that, we'll wrap up another episode of Dirt Road Discussions, and we'll see you down the road.